Hello, my name's Sonia. Welcome to our weekly Astro update. We're looking at October for the week of the 2nd to the 9th of October. And with me is my co-host for October. I've got my very good friend Shauna. Hi, Shauna.
Hi, Sonia.
Hey, would you like to introduce yourself, Shauna?
Sure. I'm Chris Brennan. This is the Astrology Podcast. I'm just kidding. I stole his background for today.
Love it.
I look good in blue. I'm Shauna. I'm the face, voice, typing comments behind Smart Astro. The website is smartastro.com. Same on Instagram and Twitter.
Thank you. It's great. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So this is our overview for the whole month of October. We take you through a solar eclipse on the 2nd and some other astrology. We've got Pluto stationary direct, Jupiter is stationary retrograde, and some ingresses that we'll take you through. And we'll look at the overview of the month to take you through everything. And for this week, from the 2nd to the 9th of October, we're going to be looking at the solar eclipse in Libra that happens on the 2nd of October. On the 4th, we've got Venus trining Saturn. On the 6th, Mercury will square Mars. On the 8th, Mercury will trine Jupiter. And on the 9th, Jupiter will station retrograde. And we're changing the format up slightly. Thanks for feedback, everyone. And because of that, we're going to focus in on what I've chosen as the 3 main transits of the week, just to make it more focused for you and to make it more relevant on what you might expect from the major goings on, because we had some weeks there last month where there was like 10 things going on, and I think that could get a bit overwhelming when there's too much. And sometimes just to pick out, okay, what are the main things here? Where do we really want to focus our attention? Can really help. Shauna, what would you think about these 3 main ones? Would you agree with those, or do you have any other opinions?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on, but I think these are going to be the ones that sound off the loudest. They're going to be most recognizable. The trines, they always have that nice little lovely, add a little sparkle to whatever's happening, and they're easy to look over. So I think these other ones are going to be the most noisy.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? The trines are, because they're of the nature of ease, they're the nature of Jupiter, they can be overlooked because things just flow easily for us. So although we might talk about it, you may not notice it or register it. Whereas things like the Mercury square Mars and the retrogrades or the eclipses, that's a bit more noticeable. So the heads up is probably a bit more welcome here. So we'll have a look at the overview for the month, and we'll start with the furthest out. And as I've mentioned before, we don't have the sun and the moon because we know that
we start off in Libra and then we move into Scorpio. Yeah, the end of or the 22nd of October, right?
Right, yeah. So the sun in October will be moving from Libra. We'll be finishing up its time in Libra. We'll have a full moon in Aries in the opposite sign, where the sun is in Libra and the moon is in Aries. And then the sun will gradually move into Scorpio, and that will affect the fixed signs. So we'll see that for Scorpio, Aquarius, Taurus, and Leo. And it will be a change as well for the cardinal signs of Libra, Capricorn, Aries, and Cancer. But going out to the further out planets, we have Mercury here, will be finishing up its time, moving through Libra during the whole of October, and also traveling into Scorpio, affecting the same signs. And we see Venus here will be moving from Scorpio, where she is when we start the month, and she'll be ingressing into Sagittarius, bringing in the mutable signs. So the mutable signs here are Sagittarius, and the sign opposite is Gemini, where we see Jupiter. Then on the cross side, we see Pisces and Virgo. And these are the signs that would be square to that Venus. But also the sign where we see Saturn. And then we look to Mars. Mars will be traveling from Cancer all the way through to the end, later degrees of Cancer. But I did notice that Mars will be entering its shadow phase when it reaches 17 degrees of Cancer. And that'll be on the 5th of October. Sorry, I don't know what I clicked there.
We got stuck in eclipse land for a minute.
This is going to really throw me having no notes. Right, so Mars is there in Cancer, reaching its shadow on the 5th of October, 17 degrees. Jupiter will be turning retrograde in Gemini. So in Cancer, that will affect Cancer, its opposition Capricorn, and its square signs of Libra and Aries. Jupiter stationary retrograde will affect Gemini, Sagittarius, and its squares of Virgo and Pisces. And then Uranus will just be continuing to retrograde slightly in Taurus. In Aries, we'll have the full moon. And in Capricorn, we see Pluto will be stationing direct. So what do you think of this month? How does that look to you, Shauna?
I feel like we've got a lot of activity going with a lot of planets stationing to go retrograde. We get that chance to just redo all those words again, right? Revisit, redo, rethink. We don't have Saturn turning RX this month too?
No, I don't think so. There must be.
Your Saturn is still RX and not turning direct for a while.
Yeah, stations on the 15th of November.
Okay.
Yeah, so that'll see some movement in the Pisces area, but until then, it just keeps moving back that little bit. Okay. So we move on to solar eclipse. Right, so I've got this graphic of solar eclipses, and this is an annular eclipse when the moon is further away from the Earth than normal. So we see that the moon will travel between the Earth and the sun, and it blocks out the light of the sun. And the slides just don't want to move on.
I just love that it keeps happening on this slide.
There's a real block here, isn't there? Crap, it just keeps wanting to play.
Love it.
Right, there we go. Here we go. So here's another explanation. So a solar eclipse happens when the moon passes between the Earth and the sun, blocking the sunlight from reaching certain areas on Earth. And during a solar eclipse, the moon casts a shadow onto the Earth's surface. And there are three types of solar eclipse. There's a partial solar eclipse, when there's only part of the sun's light blocked. There's an annular solar eclipse, which is what this one will be, where you see this ring of sunlight around the moon. And then there's a total solar eclipse where there's just this aura, they call it a ring of light, where the sun is totally blocked, but you still get this haze of light that emerges. And this is a demonstration of what we see from Earth. And also side-on view, an annular solar eclipse occurs when the moon is further from the Earth and appears smaller. And during this eclipse, the moon doesn't fully cover the sun. It leaves a ring of sunlight visible around its edges. So we have the sun on the left and the Earth on the right. And in the middle, we see the moon passing between the two and casting that shadow on the Earth and also blocking out the sun. Does that sound right to you, Shauna? Does that explain it?
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
I actually, of the three eclipse positions or types, I actually think this one is the coolest.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a heavier impact or anything like that, but I think this one, from a visual standpoint, is the coolest.
Yeah, because it's quite dramatic, isn't it? That real ring of light around the sun.
You get like that crown, you know? You get that Leo crown.
So dramatic. And here is the Wild Way card for this eclipse, and building trust is the words that she's given us. And the Libra 2 decan that it falls into, the key words are binding together, oaths and promises, and the potential for betrayal. So there's a warning. It's happening on October the 2nd at 10 degrees and 3 minutes of Libra.
Well, the eclipses were always taken as like an omen, right? So I love that this card is showing the potential for building trust, but also, you know, with trust comes the accountability and the desire for security. So there's a lot built into this too.
Yeah. Both partners have to fulfill their part of the deal. You know, it's really important. I mean, it says they're holding this chain together. That's the bind. So it's tested this time. But, you know, as long as they both hold on, it holds fast. And the commitment is strong and true as these ravens. Any time one could release their grip and fly away. So it reminds us that we're free in our promises and our choices. But there's abandonment or betrayal if we enter an agreement and then leave. So we need to think very carefully, check every element when we make a promise, you know, to make sure that we're happy with it before we agree to it, you know, because those chains will bind us. So be sure what we're signing up for. Use discernment, use wisdom. And then happiness and lasting contentment is possible when we're chained to one that we're content to be chained to. Sometimes those chains, like you say, give that security and a sense when there is trust and it's reciprocated. It's a very comforting feeling, isn't it? It's a nice place to be. And Bernadette Brady has written a book that I've got where she's analysed all of the eclipses by Saros series. And this one is a partner to the eclipse that we saw earlier in September. So it's the same, there's one in the north and one in the south, but she gives the same delineation for both. And this one also warns of separation and loss, to be parted, to finish something with sadness. She warns that physical injury is possible through overexertion and to avoid strenuous activity. And it kind of reminds me, it's felt that we've seen a lot of souls leave in this eclipse portal that we've been traveling through between eclipses.
Yes.
I've noticed that, and it does feel like this separation and loss and the parting. It does feel like every day in the news, but also in our personal stories that we share. There's been family members leaving for quite a few of us, which has been quite sad. Particular series ends in 2962, so I don't know that any of us will be around to see it end. And we do see as the totality of the eclipse gets bigger, it's more in the middle of the series. So the series lasts approximately 18 years, just over 18 years. And this one is part of the series 144. It's number 17 of 70. And we can look back to 2006 in September and September 1988. And that might give you an idea of what themes were going on in your life then. And we talk about the spiral staircase, as in those themes can repeat, but you're in a different place when those themes come around again. So quite often you've learned something and you're acting differently and responding differently because of what you've learned in the meantime, but also the people around you have also had their own themes going on. We've got to remember this. Astrology happens to everybody. None of us are living in a vacuum. So the people around us have had their own eclipses that have affected them in different ways as well. And of course, eclipses don't affect everybody. It would depend where this occurs, where it falls in your chart. Obviously, people on the Libra Aries axis will be most affected. But this axis is finishing up now. So it's the closing out of this story that started 2 years or so ago for you. This eclipse is most clearly seen over Argentina and Chile, and maybe over the Pacific Ocean regions. They're likely to see at least partial eclipse. So the main part of the annual eclipse is seen over the central area, and then there's an area around it that will see parts of it. They'll see like the partial shadow area. The south of North America, much of South America, the Pacific, the Atlantic and Antarctica may well see something. So keep your eyes out if you're in those areas. It's always a great thing to see one and have one in your area. Although whether that's a blessing, I don't know. I know with the Trump shooting, that's said to have been in one of the areas for the April eclipses, isn't it? That's said to have been in the path. So sometimes it can be, like you say, an omen of dramatic events. So we talked about the Saros series and the theme. Yep, I think that's everything I've got. What did you think about this eclipse, Shauna?
With that, you hit on a couple of dates. I mean, those 2 years that you mentioned in particular, stand out heavily in my chart. I do have the Aries Libra axis angular, and I think those are the people that are going to feel these eclipses more heavily. But like you said, we're closing out of the Aries Libra. I'm very interested to see where the Pisces Virgo takes us. We just had that lunar eclipse. We're in between those two right now. That how that ties us into the next storyline and how it starts to morph, like you said, that spiral staircase, to see where the plot line starts aiming. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a foreshadowing, wasn't it?
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep my diary full of notes and events and what's been happening. I mean, I did note between these eclipses, and maybe I've got the note on the Pluto, but there's been some events we've seen like the eclipses can sometimes trigger things. We've seen like some people, corruption in power is being brought to justice, particularly after the lunar eclipse. There's been is it P. Diddy, the story?
Yeah.
And Harvey Weinstein was back in the news. I think he'd had an appeal that may have failed. Prince Andrew is back in the news with another Netflix drama coming out. So those people, there's like another step in their story. Like the eclipse is moving that story on one more point. So we often find that the moon will act as the trigger, that the eclipses and the nodes will be the longer arc of the story, and then something in the moon will trigger like the main events.
Yeah, a new chapter starting or
yeah, and the eclipses don't often show like one thing happening on that day. It tends to be a longer story arc that evolves over quite often the 2 years of the nodes being in that particular house for you, if they're aspecting your chart, or like Chris Brennan says, as you're channeling him, major endings and major beginnings. That we say one door has to close for another door to open. So something comes to an end and it opens the door for you to go down another path. So as something ends, it redirects you to somewhere that you're meant to be, where your energy was focused in one place. You're kind of forcibly redirected onto another path, like a roadblock. It's like, no, you're really not going down that road today. You're really going to be looking at this road, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. I don't always think that they're involuntary though either. Sometimes that choice just becomes clear.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're stuck in that analysis paralysis and you just can't decide, or you have too many choices, and then that storyline starts to thin out and you're like, okay, this makes it more obvious and this is the direction I'm supposed to go, and then you start taking those steps.
Yeah. And it can be a knowing as well, can't it? Just as an inner understanding as well, just
right,
that clarity that comes to guide you forward. It's not always external events as well. It can be just those inner, something that gives you the impetus to take a step that you've been thinking about for a long time, but you've never actually been brave enough to move it forward.
Definitely.
Yes, Shauna. Hey. So do you want to take us away with Mercury squaring Mars?
Yeah, Mars is making a superior square to Mercury. We are sitting in the cardinal points again, Cancer and Libra. So if you've got those angular in any way, you can look to those houses to see how that's going to affect your day-to-day and what kinds of things you can expect. But usually a square brings tension. So tension isn't always bad, but sometimes it's the friction that starts the fire, or, it's the flipping of the switch that turns on the furnace in this day and age, But it can also be, people in your life pop up and they're a little more direct than they usually are. Or, for example, in this chart, maybe with Cancer in the 10th, you might have your boss is being a little bit more direct towards you, or suddenly more clear in their instructions if you've been muddled in the past. If they're on different angles, you might find yourself drawn to a different kind of music, or maybe you take up new kind of hobby. Or sometimes with this, Mercury Mars or Mars Mercury, I immediately think of real quick movements. Mars being like an exertion, Mercury just likes to move, right? Jump rope, towing the line. So I think with Mars Mercury, it can definitely be more rapid development. It could also be the cutting off. Mars likes to sever. So, it can certainly be the cutting off of something, or again, voluntary or involuntary. Go either way. Or all of a sudden you get the spark of ideas, or, something like that.
I really like that. This is the opening square, which is interesting. It's kind of like the first point of tension since their conjunction. I did have the date, but my notes have disappeared, or I've got the wrong notes have popped up,
or Mars Mercury, your notes disappear.
There's not even a Mercury retrograde, is there?
Not right now.
Going for it, and we went back and checked, and they're all in the right place. And you get back to the presentation, and they're in the wrong place. So I can talk to you about the Jupiter Gemini retrograde, but my notes with the actual dates are not there, so I'll have to put them in the show notes or something. So I've got things like the archetype when these two come together. Like, I agree with everything you've said. I love everything you've said about these two. I'm thinking also things like protest songs and lyrics being used as attacks that could be interesting given where you're coming to in your political cycle.
Yes.
Mm,
Yeah. And tying back to what you were just mentioning in the artistic world.
yeah,
Yeah.
because of the Libra nature, Venus has got the sway here, and Mercury can't see Venus. So he could be going a little bit rogue. I mean, Mercury isn't visible there either.
Right.
Still under the beams of the sun.
Yeah.
So there's maybe something bubbling under the surface that we won't see until Mercury gets to Scorpio. But that could be interesting. Things could be being generated that will come out as viral later. But they're being generated now, this kind of tension in this first square where there's adjustments being made. So I would imagine in the political campaigns, maybe there's adjustments being made, turning points from that first conjunction.
It's interesting in the last few degrees too with the South Node.
Yes.
Yeah, a little bit of that release, right? How does Nick Dagan sing it? Meditated
Oh, right. Yeah.
with the North Node, right?
So the North Node is a meditative force.
Premeditated, and the South Node is the surrender or the release.
Yeah. So that release getting a little bit extreme with the South.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that archetype, protest songs, lyrics as attack, fast voice and speech, passionate writing or speech, and yeah, sort of like racing for aggression. So it's like some release of aggression, but using the communication and the intellect to do it. And because you've got Mars in Cancer there, bringing all those feels of the moon, and Mars is trining the moon, hasn't got sight of the moon. So Mars can see its ruler. So it's strengthened by that. And Mars has the Venus as the Trapicity ruler that's also trining. It's kind of got a lot of that energy from Venus and the moon there, I feel.
Yeah,
Although they're both fall and detriment there. So it's kind of interesting. Everybody's struggling. All those planets. Mars isn't comfortable. Venus and the moon aren't comfortable. So they're all having to rise up from a place of difficulty. And that's where all the best protest songs and political movements come from, don't they? It's like something needs fixing. What are we going to do about it? And that's where people become advocates for something, is that they see a problem and they know they need to fix it. They want to fix it. And it usually comes from difficulty. But
people who are comfortable don't make change.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Change comes from discomfort and dissatisfaction and pain. And I think you can definitely, forgive me, but feel some of that in this transit.
Yeah.
And maybe people are going to start figuring out how to find their voice. And maybe that's what will hit when Mercury joins or falls into or moves into Scorpio.
Yeah, especially given that, as we said, Mars will be, that is literally the point of its shadow there, which means that from this point onwards, as Mars moves forward and will eventually travel into Leo, everything that Mars is doing now may need to be redone or reviewed, may experience setbacks when Mars then travels back over it. So it's going to be looked at 3 times. It's going to be looked at once as it travels forward, again as it travels back, and then a 3rd time as it travels forward to the 3rd time. So that's quite a lot, given that Mars is uncomfortable where it is. So certainly those cardinal signs may well start feeling that a bit more now. Would you agree with that, Shauna?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And honestly, I can't help but think about the Sean Combs stuff.
Yeah.
There's so much of that represented just in this chart alone.
Yes. Especially as Mars comes closer to opposing
the opposition.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. Okay, and then we have Jupiter turning retrograde at 21 Gemini. 1 minute. So Jupiter will return to 11 Gemini on the 4th of February 2025. So we've got quite some time that Jupiter will be retrograde. we can expect setbacks is rerouting. So again, as I was saying about Mars, Jupiter will have been in its shadow for quite some time. So the things that have been working through while Jupiter's been in that shadow place, we're now going to see Jupiter traveling back, revisiting things for a second time that Jupiter's been traveling over in Gemini. So the last Jupiter retrograde was in September 2023, and that was in Taurus. And the last air retrograde was in 2021, when it went back to 22 degrees of Aquarius. And then I've got 2012 was the last Gemini retrograde. So it's been quite some time since we've experienced Jupiter retrograde in Gemini. But we may already have been looking back at that time. If you want to know what Jupiter in Gemini represents for you, you might have already been looking at that time to see the part of the chart that Jupiter represents, because Jupiter brings the opportunities and the abundance and the wisdom and the faith and the luck. And generally it's known as the greater benefic. So usually when Jupiter enters the sign of your chart, we notice things opening up for us there. It's usually a good place for Jupiter to be in your chart. And for me, it's in a financial area. And what I noticed was I started spending more. I kind of have credit card will spend in my astrology courses.
Well, he's far away from home here too. So technically he's in exile. He's in detriment.
Yeah.
So yeah, it sounds about right. There goes money.
There goes my money. Bye-bye.
Nice seeing you.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, so not so good. So I hope there won't be a review of any of those. I will have to start knuckling down and doing some hard study with them, catching up on the ones that I'm behind with. Because, I bought more than I can actually physically study time. But it's like as one course ends, I'll start the next.
Yeah, you won't go dry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the new software should arrive in October, which around this time maybe. So that'll be interesting. And I probably bought it as Jupiter ingressed into that sign.
That's interesting. Yep.
Yeah. So that'll be good. And we're beta testing that. So that's quite a new development in the area of astrology software. So we'll be talking about that, and hopefully I'll be able to use it once it launches to the public. I'll be able to start using it.
You know, that launch, or the fact that you'll be getting it about this time, seems really appropriate for the retrograde.
It does, doesn't
You're
it?
beta testing. It's nothing, it's all review.
Yep.
That's really nice. I like it.
Yeah, it fits really well for that, doesn't it? So this is going to have mutable people. So this is our Gemini people, and also particularly because we see Mercury here in Libra. So it's heading away from the sun, and I notice it's picking up speed now, heading towards Scorpio. But Jupiter's in a nice trine to Mercury, so that's something at least, even though Mercury's still under the beams, whereas Mercury combust.
Well, we're at about 6 degrees now, so combustion.
Yeah. So it's still combust. So we're looking at Gemini, Sagittarius as the opposition.
Virgo was Pisces.
Pisces and Virgo. And what did you think, Shauna? How's it been for you, Virgo? Jupiter and Gemini.
Well, personally, that's the 12th house for me. So there's I don't mind a Jupiter and Gemini. It always brings some interest with it. But usually it expands whatever it's going to hit, right? It's Jupiter and still a benefic, so ultimately for the greater good, but doesn't mean it won't be difficult. Jupiter being far away from home has got to kind of scrape and scrimp for what resources it can get a hold of, and make do with that, figure out how to build the tree house without having trees stuck in the middle of the desert or something. I don't know. Yeah. It's also starting to move back toward a square to Saturn too, but that won't be for some time. Well, that's actually separating, so scratch that.
Yeah, because they're both retrograde, but Jupiter will go faster. Mind you, once Saturn stations next month, it will start applying to it, won't it? Okay, so that ends our first week of October. We'll be back next week, bringing you the 9th to the 16th of October. So thank you so much to my co-host, Shauna. Would you like to just remind everybody where they can find you, Shauna?
Yeah, sure. I'm Shauna. I'm with at smartastro.com, smartastro on Instagram as well as Twitter.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm Sonia from celestialastrology.com, and that's where you can find me, and on social media as Celestial Astros and Substack as well. We're both on Substack, and we're both open for astrology readings. Okay, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Shauna. Thank you so much for joining us for the weekly forecast. You often hear creators ask you, could you please like and subscribe? And I can't emphasize enough how important it is for small channels. It really does make the difference. And also, we all want to reach the audience that our content is made for. And we can do this with your help if you've enjoyed it. It gives us immediate feedback on what you're enjoying and what you would like more of. It doesn't cost you anything, and it's a great way for you to support our work and just let us know that you're enjoying what we're doing. So if you have enjoyed this content through to the end and you'd like us to keep making it and make more of it, that's a great way for you to let us know. So wherever you're watching this, please do give us a thumbs up and give us your support. And we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.